Children possess a terrifying innocence. They don't see the tailored Italian suits that cost more than a car, or the concealed weapons resting comfortably in shoulder holsters. They only see right and wrong. When 7-year-old Mia marched into the penthouse office of New York's most feared syndicate leader, she didn't know she was standing before a man who could end a life with a single nod. She just knew her mother was crying over unpaid bills. What followed wasn't a massacre, but a sudden, chilling paralysis of a ruthless empire. This is a story of debt, danger, and a dark obsession. High above the glittering, unforgiving grid of Manhattan, the air inside the executive suite of Cortese Enterprises was heavy with the scent of aged scotch and impending violence. Alec Cortese, a man whose name was whispered with equal parts reverence and terror in the city's criminal underworld, sat behind a sprawling mahogany desk. He was not a man given to mercy. His empire had been built on a foundation of iron-fisted control, a legacy inherited from his father, but perfected through his own brutal efficiency. Across the room, his underboss, Carmine, stood rigidly, detailing a shipment of illicit cargo that had been delayed at the docks. Alec's dark eyes, cold and assessing, were fixed on a ledger, his jaw clenched in a sharp, unforgiving line. He was calculating the exact percentage of blood and money it would cost to rectify the dockside error. Then, the heavy oak doors of the penthouse, doors guarded by 2 armed men in the antechamber, pushed open with a soft, hesitant creak. Carmine's hand instantly flew to the holster beneath his jacket. Alec's eyes snapped up, a lethal stillness falling over him. A breach in this office was impossible. It meant betrayal. It meant death. But the figure that stepped onto the plush Persian rug wasn't a rival hitman or a federal agent. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She wore a faded pink corduroy jacket, scuffed white sneakers that flashed with battery-powered lights when she stepped, and a backpack shaped like a cartoon dog. Her dark hair was pulled into uneven pigtails, and her face was set in an expression of absolute, unadulterated defiance. Carmine froze, his hand still hovering over his weapon, staring at the child as if she were a ghost. Alec sat completely paralyzed, the heavy crystal pen slipping from his fingers to clatter against the mahogany. For a man who had stared down the barrels of shotguns without blinking, the sight of this tiny, defiant creature in his sanctum was utterly destabilizing. "Which one of you is the boss?" the girl demanded. Her voice was high-pitched but surprisingly steady, echoing in the vast, intimidating room. Alec found his voice, though it felt entirely foreign in his throat. A low, gravelly sound. "Who let you in here?" "Nobody," she stated matter-of-factly, marching closer to the massive desk. The big men outside were looking at their phones. I crawled under the shiny desk in the hallway. "You're the boss, right? The man who owns the building?" Alec slowly leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. He motioned with 2 fingers for Carmine to stand down. "I own many things." "What is your name, little girl?" "Mia," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "Mia Hayes. And I'm here because I have a complaint." A dark amusement flickered briefly in Alec's eyes, quickly replaced by a profound confusion. "A complaint? Yes." Mia took another step forward, planting her light-up shoes firmly on the rug. Her bottom lip trembled slightly, betraying her tough facade, but she bit it down. "My mom works so hard. Why won't you pay her?" The words hung in the air, heavy and incongruous. Alec froze. The question didn't make sense. He dealt in millions, in extortion, in racketeering, and high-stakes corporate espionage. He didn't handle payroll. "Explain yourself," Alec commanded softly, leaning in closer. "My mum cleans this building. She cleans the bathrooms and the glass. And she makes everything smell like lemons, Mia said, her voice rising in defensive anger. She works when it's dark outside, but she was crying this morning in the kitchen. She said the management company, your company, hasn't paid the cleaning people in 2 months. We can't buy groceries and the landlord put a yellow paper on our door. Mia pointed a tiny, accusing finger directly at the Mafia Boss. She works harder than you. All you do is sit in a big chair. Why are you stealing her money? Carmine sucked in a sharp breath. Men had been gutted and dumped in the East River for showing a fraction of that disrespect to Alec Cortese. But Alec didn't move. He stared at the small finger pointing at him, and then up at the fierce, desperate eyes of the child. A strange, unfamiliar tightening gripped his chest. He was a monster to many, a predator who thrived in the shadows of the city. But he had a code. He didn't starve working-class women and children. "Your mother is a cleaner here," Alec repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Not angry at the child, but at the implications of her words. "Yes, Clara Hayes. She's downstairs on the 42nd floor right now, emptying the trash. And she doesn't know I came up here, so don't you dare yell at her," Mia warned, though a tear finally spilled over her eyelash, tracking down her cheek. "Just pay her, please." Alec slowly stood up. He was a towering figure, broad-shouldered and imposing, tailored in a midnight blue suit that accentuated his dangerous aura. Mia instinctively took a step back, her courage finally faltering as the sheer size of the man registered. Alec walked around the desk, his movements slow and deliberate. He knelt down on one knee, bringing himself eye-level with the girl. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a pristine, monogrammed silk handkerchief, offering it to her. "Take it," he murmured. Mia hesitated, then snatched the handkerchief, wiping her nose. "I do not steal from women who make my building smell like lemons, Mia," Alec said, his tone devoid of its usual lethal edge, replaced by a cold, terrifying sincerity. "Someone has made a very grave mistake, and I promise you, it will be corrected tonight." Before Mia could respond, the heavy doors burst open. A woman rushed in, her face pale with sheer terror. She wore a blue janitorial uniform, her hands clutching a cleaning rag like a lifeline. She was beautiful, even with the dark circles under her eyes, and her hair falling out of a messy bun. "Mia!" the woman gasped, her voice cracking. She ran forward, grabbing the little girl by the shoulders and pulling her back, shielding the child with her own body. She looked up at Alec, her eyes wide with the primal fear of a mother recognizing a predator. "I am so sorry. I swear, sir, she just wandered off. It will never happen again." "Please don't call the police. I'll double my shift." Alec stood up slowly, his gaze shifting from the little girl to the mother. Clara Hayes. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, but also a fierce, undeniable strength. "No one is calling the police, Ms. Hayes," Alec said smoothly, his eyes locking onto hers. The fear in her eyes sent an unexpected jolt through him. He hated it. "Your daughter and I were just having a conversation about management." Clara looked bewildered, clutching Mia tighter. "Management? Take your daughter home, Clara," Alec ordered softly. "Your shift is over for the night." "But I haven't finished." I said, "Your shift is over." Alec's voice brokered no argument. He looked over at his underboss. "Carmine, have a car brought around. Drive Ms. Hayes and her daughter home. Wait until they are safely inside." Clara shook her head rapidly. No, that's not necessary. We can take the subway." "You will take the car," Alec insisted, taking a step closer. Clara flinched, and Alec stopped, a muscle feathering in his jaw. "Have a good evening, Ms. Hayes." As Carmine ushered the terrified mother and child out of the penthouse, Alec Cortese turned back to his desk. The quiet returned, but the atmosphere had violently shifted. He picked up his desk phone, dialing a number from memory. "Get me the name of the subcontractor who handles the janitorial staff for this building," Alec commanded into the receiver, his voice dripping with lethal intent. "And find out who the hell thought it was acceptable to pocket their payroll." Richard Banning was a man who thrived in the lucrative grey areas of corporate America. As the owner of Summit Janitorial Services, he held contracts for dozens of high-rises in Manhattan. He made a comfortable living by severely underbidding competitors to win contracts, and then squeezing his profit margins out of the very workers he employed. Delaying payroll for a month or two, citing clerical errors from the parent companies, was a standard tactic. The workers, mostly immigrants, single mothers, and desperate people, rarely had the resources to fight back. It was 11:30 p.m. Banning was enjoying a glass of expensive bourbon in his suburban New Jersey home, admiring his newly renovated kitchen, paid for entirely by the clerical errors of the last quarter. The heavy oak door of his house didn't ring. It simply burst inward with a sickening crunch of splintering wood. Banning dropped his glass, the bourbon shattering over the imported tile. 3 men walked into his home. 2 were built like freight trains, their faces devoid of any emotion. But it was the man in the center who made Banning's blood run cold. Alec Cortese stepped into the light of the kitchen. He was immaculate, calm, and radiated a violence so profound it made the air in the room feel thin. "Mr. Banning," Alec said smoothly, stepping over the shattered glass, "I apologize for the intrusion. Your door was uncooperative." Banning backed up against the marble island, his hands trembling. "Cortese, Mr. Cortese, to what do I owe the honor? If this is about the union negotiations, I told your associates, this isn't about unions, Richard," Alec interrupted, stopping a few feet away. He casually inspected the expensive espresso machine on the counter. "It's about accounting. Cortese Enterprises pays Summit Janitorial a premium contract on the 1st of every month, without fail." "Yes, absolutely," Banning stammered, sweating profusely. "So," Alec turned to him, his dark eyes devoid of any warmth. "Why was I informed today that the cleaning staff in my flagship building haven't seen a paycheck in 2 months?" Banning's face drained of color. That must be a mistake, a banking error. You know how these automated systems are, Mr. Cortese. I'll look into it first thing Monday morning." Alec nodded slowly, as if considering the excuse. Then he moved. Faster than a man of his size had any right to move. He closed the distance, his hand shooting out to wrap around Banning's throat, slamming the older man back against the marble countertop. Banning gagged, his hands frantically clawing at Alec's iron grip. The 2 enforcers at the door didn't even blink. "A little girl, Richard," Alec whispered, leaning in so close Banning could smell the mint on his breath. "A 7-year-old girl walked into my office today and accused me of stealing from her mother. She accused me of starving her." Alec tightened his grip fractionally, watching the panic flare in Banning's bulging eyes. "I have done terrible things in my life, Richard. Things that would make you soil yourself if I described them to you," Alec continued, his voice barely above a lethal hum. "But I do not steal from the people who scrub my floors. I do not take food out of the mouths of children. You used my company's name to cover your own greed." "I'll pay them!" Banning wheezed out, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. "Tomorrow, all of it." Alec released him, letting Banning collapse to the floor, coughing and gasping for air. Alec pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, wiped his hands, and tossed it onto the weeping man. "You will wire the back pay tonight," Alec commanded, looking down at him with utter disgust, "with a 20% bonus for the clerical error, and you will personally deliver a cashier's check to a woman named Clara Hayes by 8 a.m. tomorrow." If you are 1 minute late or 1 penny short, my men willn't come to your front door next time. They will come to your bedroom." Alec turned and walked out, his expensive shoes crunching over the broken glass. "Carmine," he called over his shoulder, "stay and help Mr. Banning with his banking." The next morning, Clara Hayes was frantically packing a meager lunch for Mia, her mind racing with panic. She hadn't slept. The terrifying encounter in the penthouse played on a loop in her head. Alec Cortese. She knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the rumors. He was a mobster, a killer, and her daughter had just walked into his lair and demanded money. She expected the police to knock on her door at any moment, or worse, men with guns to evict them. Instead, a sharp knock startled her. She opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain engaged. Standing in the hallway was a pale, nervous man in a rumpled suit. It took her a moment to recognize Richard Banning, the elusive owner of the cleaning company. "Mr. Banning?" she asked, bewildered. "Ms. Hayes," Banning said, his voice strained. He looked exhausted, and he kept twitching, glancing nervously down the hallway. He shoved a heavy white envelope through the crack in the door. "Your back pay, plus a bonus for the inconvenience. The banking error has been resolved." Clara took the envelope. It was thick. "I don't understand." "Just take it," Banning urged, his eyes wide with an unspoken terror. "And please, if anyone asks, Summit Janitorial has always taken care of you. Good day." He practically ran down the hall toward the stairwell. Clara closed the door, her hands shaking as she ripped open the envelope. Inside were stacks of crisp $100 bills. It was thousands of dollars. More than she had made in 6 months. She stared at the money, a heavy, sinking feeling in her stomach. This wasn't a banking error. This was blood money. It was the terrifying, invisible hand of Alec Cortese. He had done this. Mia skipped out of her bedroom, backpack on. "Mommy, are we going to have enough for pizza tonight?" Clara looked from the money to her innocent daughter. A cold shiver ran down her spine. "Yes, baby," Clara whispered, pulling Mia into a tight hug. "We can have whatever you want." But as she held her daughter, Clara knew one thing for certain. They were now on the radar of a very dangerous man. And in the world of Alec Cortese, a favor was never just a favor. It was a debt. 2 weeks passed. The money from the envelope paid off Clara's back rent, filled her refrigerator, and even bought Mia a new winter coat. Clara had tried to put the money into a separate account, intending to pay it back if she could, but desperation had forced her hand. Despite the sudden financial relief, she lived in a state of hypervigilance. Every time she went to work at the Cortese building, she expected to be fired, or worse, summoned back up to the 48th floor. But nothing happened. The building remained the same. She scrubbed the same marble floors, emptied the same trash cans. It was as if the terrifying encounter had been a fever dream. Until a rainy Tuesday evening. Clara was working late, polishing the brass fixtures in the grand lobby of the Cortese building. The lobby was usually deserted by 10 p.m., a cavernous space of glass and stone, bathed in the soft glow of security lighting. She was stretching to reach the top hinge of the massive front doors when a deep voice startled her. "You missed a spot." Clara dropped her rag, spinning around. Standing in the shadows near the elevator bank was Alec. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket tonight. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing muscular forearms and a complex, dark tattoo peeking out from his left cuff. He looked less like a CEO and more like the dangerous street soldier he had once been. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She instinctively took a step back, clutching the polished bottle like a weapon. "Mr. Cortese." Alec stepped out of the shadows, his hands resting casually in his pockets. He moved with a quiet, predatory grace. "I told you. It's Alec." I should get back to work, Clara stammered, bending down to retrieve her rag. Alec moved faster, his hand catching the rag before she could reach it. He stood up, handing it to her. Their fingers brushed. His skin was rough, warm. Clara pulled her hand back quickly, clutching the cloth to her chest. "You've been avoiding the upper floors," Alec noted, his dark eyes studying her face. He noted the dark circles were gone, the lingering panic replaced by a guarded caution. She was beautiful. Not in the manicured, artificial way of the women in his world, but with a raw, authentic resilience. "I clean where my supervisor tells me to clean," Clara replied defensively. "Look, about the money." "What money?" Alec interrupted smoothly, feigning ignorance. "The envelope," Clara pressed, finding a sudden spark of courage. "Mr. Banning practically threw it at me. It was too much. It was thousands more than I was owed." "Perhaps Mr. Banning suddenly discovered a conscience," Alec said, his lips twitching into a ghost of a smile. "Men like him don't have consciences," Clara shot back. "And men like you don't do favors for nothing. What do you want from me?" The directness of her question surprised him. In his world, everyone played games. Everyone danced around the truth. Clara Hayes just threw it right in his face. Alec took a slow step closer. The air between them grew charged, heavy with an unspoken tension. "I want nothing from you, Clara. Your daughter pointed out an injustice in my house. I corrected it. That is all." "I don't belong in your house," Clara said softly, her eyes locked on his. She knew she was playing with fire, standing alone in a deserted lobby with a mafia boss, but she couldn't break his gaze. "No," Alec murmured, his voice dropping an octave. "You don't." Before he could say another word, the atmosphere in the lobby violently ruptured. The heavy glass of the front revolving doors shattered inward with a deafening crash. Clara screamed as shards of safety glass rained down across the marble floor. Alec's reflexes were instantaneous. The calm, brooding man vanished, replaced by a machine of pure, calibrated violence. He lunged forward, grabbing Clara by the waist and tackling her behind the thick, concrete pillar of the security desk, just as a barrage of suppressed gunfire ripped through the space where they had been standing a second before. Bullets chewed into the marble walls, filling the air with white dust and the sharp, acrid smell of cordite. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, clapping her hands over her ears, a scream trapped in her throat. She could feel the heavy weight of Alec pressing her into the floor, his body shielding hers completely. "Stay down!" Alec roared over the noise. He didn't panic. He pulled a heavy, matte black Sig Sauer from the holster at the small of his back. He peeked around the edge of the marble desk. 3 men in dark tactical gear were moving into the lobby, stepping carefully over the broken glass, their weapons raised. This wasn't a random robbery. This was a highly coordinated hit. The Lucchese family had finally made their move, striking at the heart of his territory. Alec calculated the angles. He had 2 magazines, 3 targets. He needed a distraction. He looked down at Clara. She was trembling violently, her face pale with terror. He grabbed her shoulder, squeezing hard to pull her focus. "Clara, look at me," he commanded. His voice was shockingly calm, an anchor in the chaos. She opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "When I tell you to move, you crawl behind that elevator bank and you do not stop until you are inside the service stairwell. Do you understand?" "You'll be killed," she whispered, the reality of the situation crashing over her. A dark, terrifying smile crossed Alec's face. "Not tonight. Get ready." Alec rolled out from cover, dropping to one knee. He didn't fire blindly. He fired with surgical precision. Crack! Crack! The first 2 shots took the lead gunman in the chest and throat. The man crumpled instantly. The other two gunmen pivoted, returning fire. The marble desk exploded in chunks around Alec, but he was already moving, diving behind a decorative marble planter. "Now go!" Alec yelled. Clara scrambled on her hands and knees, ignoring the sharp sting of glass cutting into her palms. She moved with the desperate, frantic energy of a mother who needed to survive for her child. She scrambled behind the polished steel of the elevator bank, dragging herself toward the heavy fire door of the stairwell. She reached the handle, pulling it open. She looked back just in time to see Alec break from cover again. He moved like a shadow, closing the distance between himself and the remaining gunman. It wasn't a gunfight anymore. It was an execution. He moved with brutal efficiency, ending the threat in a matter of seconds. Silence, heavy and ringing, slammed back down onto the lobby. Alec stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving slightly, the gun still gripped loosely in his hand. He looked across the ruined lobby, his dark eyes locking onto Clara, who was frozen in the doorway of the stairwell. She was staring at him, not just as a CEO, or the man who had paid her rent. She was looking at the monster underneath the tailored clothes. The killer. Alec expected her to run. He expected the look of absolute revulsion he had seen on the faces of so many others, but Clara didn't run. She stood there, breathing hard, blood dripping from the cuts on her hands, staring back at him. She was terrified, yes, but she was still there. And in that moment, as the sirens began to wail in the distance, Alec Cortese realized that the brief intersection of their lives was no longer an accident. It was a collision course, and he had no intention of letting her walk away. Adrenaline is a treacherous chemical. It masks pain, suppresses panic, and creates a false sense of invincibility. As the distant, approaching wail of police sirens began to echo through the concrete canyons of Manhattan, the adrenaline rapidly bled out of Clara Hayes. In its place came a cold, paralyzing terror. She was kneeling in the dust of a shattered lobby, her hands bleeding, surrounded by the bodies of men who had just tried to turn her into collateral damage. "Get up!" Alec commanded, his voice slicing through her shock. He wasn't asking. He grabbed her uninjured forearm, hauling her to her feet with effortless strength. He didn't look at the carnage he had just orchestrated. His eyes were already scanning the service corridor. "My daughter," Clara choked out, stumbling as he pulled her toward the freight elevators. "I need to get to Mia. The babysitter leaves at midnight." "Carmine is already pulling up to the loading dock," Alec said, his tone entirely clinical, devoid of the warmth he had shown her minutes prior. "We are going to your apartment. You will pack one bag for yourself and one for the child. Then you are disappearing." Clara dug her heels in, the friction burning through the soles of her cheap work shoes. "I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm calling the police." Alec stopped so abruptly that Clara crashed into his solid frame. He turned, pinning her against the cinder block wall of the corridor. The proximity was suffocating. He smelled of cordite, expensive cologne, and raw violence. "Listen to me very carefully, Clara," Alec whispered, his dark eyes boring into hers. "Those men were sent by Vincenzo Lucchese. They failed to kill me. Do you know what happens to the surviving witnesses of a failed mafia assassination?" Clara swallowed hard, her throat bone dry. "They don't leave loose ends," Alec stated brutally. "By tomorrow morning, Vincenzo will know exactly who was in that lobby with me. He will know your name. He will know where you live. And he will send men to your apartment, not to silence you, but to use you to get to me. If you go to the police, you will be dead before you reach the precinct steps. And Mia will be an orphan." The mention of her daughter extinguished the last embers of Clara's resistance. A terrified sob escaped her lips, and she nodded frantically. 10 minutes later, Clara was crammed into the back seat of a heavily armored black SUV. Carmine was behind the wheel, driving with terrifying, silent precision through the rain-slicked streets of Queens. Alec sat in the passenger seat, a tablet illuminating his sharp profile as he rapidly typed out encrypted orders, mobilizing his soldiers across the city. When they reached Clara's rundown apartment building, Alec didn't wait in the car. He and another enforcer, a hulking man named Dominic, flanked Clara as she ran up the 3 flights of stairs. Clara threw open the door. The teenage neighbor she paid to watch Mia was asleep on the sofa. Mia was tucked into her bed, clutching a stuffed rabbit. "Wake her up! 5 minutes!" Alec ordered, standing in the doorway like a grim sentinel. Clara rushed into the bedroom, shaking her daughter gently. "Mia, baby, wake up. We have to go." Mia rubbed her eyes, blinking against the harsh overhead light. "Mommy? Is it morning?" "No, sweetie. We're going on a trip." Mia sat up, catching sight of the massive silhouette in the doorway. Her sleepy eyes widened, recognizing the man from the penthouse. "The boss man. Are we going to his big house?" "Something like that," Alec replied, his voice softening just a fraction. "We're going on a secret mission, Mia. But you have to be very quiet." Mia, armed with the formidable courage of a 7-year-old who felt she had already conquered this man once, nodded solemnly. She grabbed her light-up shoes. By the time the Lucchese hitmen kicked down the door of Clara's apartment 2 hours later, they found nothing but an empty coffee pot and a hastily discarded pile of cleaning uniforms. Clara and Mia were already miles away, crossing the threshold of a heavily fortified, multi-million-dollar brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, a safe house that did not exist on any official city grid. As the heavy steel-reinforced doors locked shut behind them with a resounding clack, Clara looked around the opulent, sprawling foyer. Armed men stood discreetly in the shadows. She pulled Mia tighter against her side, realizing with a sinking heart that she hadn't just escaped a war zone. She had moved directly into the warlord's castle. The morning sun filtered through bulletproof, UV-tinted windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany floors of the Brooklyn safe house. Clara sat at a massive marble kitchen island, staring blankly at a cup of artisanal coffee she hadn't touched. In the adjoining living room, Mia was sitting on the floor, happily playing a high-stakes game of Go Fish with Dominic, the terrifying enforcer who had cleared their apartment. Dominic, a man with a jagged scar running down his cheek and a shoulder holster clearly visible beneath his suspenders, looked entirely out of his depth as he handed over his 3 of clubs to the triumphant child. Under different circumstances, the scene would have been comical, but Clara's stomach was tied in agonizing knots. The sound of heavy measured footsteps drew her attention. Alec walked into the kitchen. He had changed into a fresh, charcoal grey suit, looking completely unfazed by the fact that he had killed 3 men just hours prior. "Did you sleep?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of black coffee. "I was kidnapped by a crime syndicate," Clara replied, her voice trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and dormant anger. "No, Mr. Cortese, I didn't sleep." Alec leaned against the counter, his dark eyes studying her. "You are under my protection, Clara. There is a distinct difference." "Is there?" She stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Because from where I'm sitting, I have men with guns blocking the front door, I don't have my phone, and my daughter is playing cards with a hitman. Dominic has 2 daughters of his own." "He is exceptionally gentle," Alec said, calmly. He set his coffee mug down, his expression hardening. "And you need to understand the reality of the situation. Vincenzo Lucchese didn't strike my lobby at random. He knew exactly where I would be." Clara frowned, her anger faltering. "How could he? The lobby was empty." "It was empty except for you," Alec corrected softly. He walked around the island, closing the distance between them, until Clara had to tilt her head up to meet his gaze. I spent the night interrogating the surviving networks in my territory, Alec continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low hum. Do you want to know what I found out? I found out that Richard Banning, the man who owns the cleaning company you worked for, was laundering money for the Lucchese family through his phantom payrolls. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The money. The wages he wasn't paying us. Exactly, Alec nodded slowly. Banning was skimming the top to clean Vincenzo's dirty cash. When I paid Banning a visit and nearly snapped his neck for withholding your paycheck, Banning panicked. He thought I had uncovered the laundering scheme. He ran straight to Vincenzo Lucchese. The pieces fell into place with a sickening clarity. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Vincenzo is a paranoid man, Alec explained, his eyes locking onto hers, intense and unyielding. When Banning told him that Alec Cortese, a man who hasn't shown mercy in a decade, personally threatened him over a single, unpaid scrubwoman. Vincenzo realized two things. One, his laundering operation was burned. And two, I had a vulnerability. He had his men track your work schedule. They knew I would seek you out again. You weren't collateral damage in that lobby, Clara. You were the bait. Clara stumbled back, hitting the edge of the marble counter. Her breathing turned shallow and erratic. Because of me? Because Mia came to your office? We started a mafia war? Alec reached out, his large, warm hands gripping her shoulders, steadying her. No, you exposed a rot that was already there. Vincenzo has been looking for an excuse to strike at my territory for years. He just miscalculated my response. What? What are you going to do? Clara whispered, staring at the hard, unforgiving lines of his face. I am going to systematically dismantle the Lucchese family, Alec stated, the words laced with an absolute, chilling certainty. I am going to burn their operations to the ground, and I am going to put Vincenzo in the ground. He released her shoulders, his fingers lingering for a fraction of a second against the curve of her neck. But while I do that, you and Mia will remain here. You will not leave this house. You will not contact anyone. I have brought a tutor in for Mia, and anything you require will be procured by Carmine. Clara looked into his eyes, searching for the monster she had seen in the lobby, but finding only a terrifying, possessive protection. He had ordered deaths, he ran a criminal empire, and yet he was turning his entire world upside down to shield her child. Why are you doing this? Clara asked, her voice barely a breath. You could have just let us go. We're nothing to you. Alec stopped at the threshold of the kitchen. He didn't look back at her, his broad shoulders tense beneath the tailored wool of his suit. I am a man who deals in debts, Clara, Alec said quietly to the empty hallway. And I owe your daughter. She reminded me that I still had a soul to lose. I have no intention of letting Vincenzo Lucchese take it from me. As Alec walked away, disappearing into the depths of the safe house to orchestrate a bloodbath, Clara realized the horrifying truth. She wasn't just trapped in a gilded cage. She was falling for the monster guarding the door. Morning sunlight did little to soften the heavy security protocols suffocating the Brooklyn brownstone. Clara Hayes stood by the reinforced living room window, watching two men in tailored suits and earpieces patrolling the perimeter of the private courtyard. 3 days had passed since the extraction. 3 days of locked doors, hushed conversations in the hallways, and the crushing realization that her old life was permanently gone. Alec Cortese was a phantom in his own fortress. He left before dawn and returned long after midnight, operating a war room out of the subterranean basement. He was systematically dismantling the Lucchese family. But contrary to the bloody mob movies Clara had seen, the streets of New York weren't running red with gunfire. Alec was a modern syndicate leader, His most devastating weapons were not firearms, but financial ruin. To execute this, Alec bypassed traditional underworld hackers and quietly contracted operatives from Kroll, the premier real-world corporate investigation and risk consulting firm. Kroll's forensic accountants, operating under airtight non-disclosure agreements, were ruthlessly dissecting Richard Banning's fabricated ledgers. They traced Vincenzo Lucchese's laundered cash through a labyrinth of offshore shell companies, effectively freezing the rival boss's assets in Geneva and the Cayman Islands. Alec was cutting off Vincenzo's oxygen before ever aiming a gun at his head. Clara, however, felt entirely useless. She was a woman accustomed to breaking her back for every dollar, to moving constantly to keep herself and Mia afloat. Being relegated to the role of a protected asset chafed at her sanity. That evening, the heavy oak door of the study clicked open. Clara turned from the bookshelf to see Alec step into the room. He looked exhausted. His tie was missing, his collar unbuttoned, and a faint, purpling bruise shadowed his left jawline. He moved heavily to the crystal decanter on his desk, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid. "You should be asleep," Alec noted, his voice raspy. "I don't do well with cages, Mr. Cortese, even gilded ones," Clara replied, stepping out of the shadows of the library. Alec paused, the glass halfway to his lips. He let out a low, humorless exhale. "Alec, I have told you 3 times, Clara. My name is Alec." "Alec," she corrected, the name feeling dangerously intimate on her tongue. She walked closer to the massive oak desk. "I need to do something. You have a tutor for Mia, a chef making our meals, and guards watching us breathe. I am losing my mind. Let me help." He looked at her, his dark eyes analyzing her posture. "This is not a world you want to participate in. The men I am dealing with do not have boundaries. They already crossed my boundaries when they shot up a lobby while I was in it." Clara fired back, her chin tilting up in defiance. "Banning was my boss. I know the cleaning routes. I know the schedules he manipulated. I know which subcontractors he favored. If you are tracking his phantom payrolls, I can tell you which buildings actually had crews and which ones were ghost operations." Alec set his glass down. He stared at her, genuinely surprised. The women he usually encountered either wanted his money or feared his reputation. None of them offered to help him map out a money-laundering schematic. "Come here," he commanded softly. Clara hesitated, then walked around the desk. Alec pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger, a copy of the files Kroll had extracted from Banning's server, and spread it flat. For the next 2 hours they stood shoulder to shoulder. The proximity was intoxicating and terrifying. Clara pointed out the discrepancies, her finger tracing down lists of commercial real estate. Alec leaned in, his arm brushing against hers, his scent of sandalwood and cold night air wrapping around her. Every time their skin grazed, a sudden electric tension spiked in the quiet room. "This one," Clara said, her voice dropping to a whisper as she pointed to a high-rise in Midtown. Summit Janitorial claimed they had 40 people working there on night shifts, but I covered for a girl there twice. The security log only ever signed in 12. Alec marked the page with a heavy pen. 28 ghost employees, $500,000 in washed cash a month in just one location. He turned his head to look at her. They were inches apart. The tactical, ruthless boss melted away, leaving a man entirely captivated by the fierce intelligence of the woman beside him. "You are remarkable," Alec murmured, his gaze dropping momentarily to her lips before meeting her eyes again. Clara's breath hitched. She should have pulled away. She should have reminded him that she was just a janitor, and he was a criminal kingpin. But she didn't move. The air between them grew impossibly thick, gravity shifting entirely to the space separating them. Alec reached up, his rough knuckles gently grazing the soft skin of her cheek. Clara's eyes fluttered shut at the contact, a shiver running down her spine. He leaned in, the dangerous space closing, his intent clear. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany door swung open. Carmine burst into the study, his face pale and tight with alarm. Alec instantly pulled back, the lethal mask snapping back onto his face in a millisecond. "What is it?" Alec snapped, annoyed by the intrusion, but recognizing his underboss's panic. "It's not a hit, boss," Carmine said, stepping into the room and holding up a stack of official-looking documents. "It's worse. Vincenzo changed tactics. He knows he can't breach this house, so he's using the city." Clara's stomach plummeted. "What do you mean?" Carmine looked at Clara with deep regret before turning back to Alec. "Family court. Vincenzo owns a corrupt judge in Manhattan. They just filed an emergency ex parte order. They framed Clara as a willing accomplice in Banning's embezzlement ring. The judge signed a mandate declaring Clara an unfit guardian." "No," Clara gasped, stepping backward as if physically struck. "They've weaponized Child Protective Services," Carmine finished grimly. "There are 2 NYPD cruisers and a social worker at the front gate right now. They have a legal warrant to remove Mia and place her in state custody." Paperwork proved to be a deadlier weapon than bullets. The Lucchese family had realized that a frontal assault on Alec Cortese was suicide, so they had targeted the only piece of leverage on the board. A 7-year-old girl. Panic, cold and suffocating, seized Clara. "They can't take her! They can't just take my daughter!" She lunged toward the door, blindly desperate to reach Mia's bedroom. Alec caught her around the waist, pulling her back against his chest. She thrashed against him, crying out, but his grip was unyielding. "Clara, stop!" Alec barked, his voice vibrating through her. "Listen to me. You do not walk out that door. If you cross the perimeter and they take her, she goes into the foster system, and Vincenzo's people will scoop her up before the sun rises. She will be a hostage." Clara collapsed against him, her legs giving out. Alec caught her full weight, slowly lowering them both to the floor of the study. He held her tightly, one hand pressing her head against his chest while she sobbed violently. "They're going to take my baby," she wept into his shirt. "Because of me. Because we ran to you." "Nobody is taking Mia," Alec promised, his voice a low, terrifying growl. He looked up at Carmine, who was standing by the desk. "Lock the gates. Nobody comes onto the property without a warrant signed by a federal judge, not a local magistrate. Delay them." "Alec, it's the NYPD," Carmine warned. "If we hold them off with armed men, it's a standoff. We'll have SWAT here in an hour." "Then get Harrison on the phone," Alec ordered, referring to his highest-priced defense attorney. "Tell him to wake up the appellate court judges on my payroll. Get a stay on that emergency order. Buy me until dawn." Carmine nodded sharply and bolted from the room, dialing his phone as he ran. Alec looked down at Clara. She was trembling violently, the terror of losing her child stripping away all her fierce bravado. He gently tilted her chin up, so she was forced to look into his eyes. "Clara, breathe," he instructed gently. "I can't," she choked out. "Vincenzo has the law on his side. You can't shoot a social worker." "No, I can't," Alec agreed, his thumb wiping a tear from her cheek. "Vincenzo is a coward. He uses the law because he knows he cannot face me in the dark, but he made a fatal miscalculation." Clara sniffled, trying to focus on his absolute certainty. "What?" "He assumed I would play defense," Alec said, his eyes darkening into pitch-black voids of impending violence. "He assumed I would tie my lawyers up in family court trying to save you, leaving him free to reorganize his assets." Alec stood up, pulling Clara up with him. He led her to the leather sofa and pressed her down into it. "You stay here. Dominic is standing guard outside Mia's door. No one gets past him, Alec commanded. He walked to the wall safe, hidden behind an oil painting, spun the dial and pulled out a heavy, suppressed tactical pistol. He checked the chamber with a sharp, mechanical clack, then slid it into the holster beneath his jacket. Clara watched him, her heart hammering. "Where are you going?" "To cut off the head of the snake," Alec replied, shrugging on a heavy black overcoat. The ex parte order is tied directly to Vincenzo's testimony regarding Banning's ledgers. If Vincenzo is no longer breathing to testify, the order collapses, and the judge who signed it will bury the paperwork to save his own career. Alec, Clara stood up, terrified of what he was about to do, terrified that he might not come back. He'll be surrounded by guards. It's a suicide mission. Alec walked back to her. He didn't offer empty reassurances. Instead, he took her face in both of his hands. "I told you I was a monster, Clara," he whispered, his lips hovering inches from hers. "Tonight, you are going to let me be one for you." He didn't wait for her permission. Alec crashed his lips onto hers in a searing, desperate kiss. It was bruised and hungry, tasting of scotch, danger, and a fierce, undeniable possession. Clara gasped into his mouth, her hands gripping the lapels of his coat, anchoring herself to the storm. She kissed him back with equal desperation, pouring all her fear and sudden, terrifying love into the contact. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathless. "Keep our girl safe," Alec murmured, resting his forehead against hers for a fleeting second. Then he turned and walked out of the study, leaving Clara alone in the fortified silence. The game of chess was over. Alec Cortese was flipping the board. Midnight hung heavily over the East River, offering no stars to illuminate the concrete fortress of the Coterie Club. Located on a private, heavily guarded pier in Brooklyn, the club served as the untouchable headquarters for Vincenzo Lucchese. It was a place where politicians, corrupt judges like Theodore Rossi, and cartel liaisons drank imported cognac and decided the fate of the city's underworld. Penetrating it was considered an absolute impossibility. Alec Cortese didn't believe in impossibilities. He believed in leverage. He didn't arrive with a small army. He arrived alone, dressed in his dark overcoat, slipping through the service entrance using access codes procured by Kroll's lead investigator, David Henson. Henson had found the gambling debts of Lucchese's head of security and exploited them flawlessly. The cameras on the eastern perimeter were looped. The guards at the loading dock were looking the other way. Alec moved through the subterranean corridors of the club like a ghost of vengeance. He bypassed the crowded, opulent casino floor, taking the private maintenance stairwell directly to Vincenzo's executive suite. His breathing was measured, his heart rate steady. The thought of Clara sobbing on his library floor, the thought of his men holding the line against NYPD, Captain Arthur Reynolds at his own front gates, narrowed his focus into a lethal, piercing point. He breached the heavy mahogany doors of the suite without a sound. Vincenzo Lucchese was sitting by a roaring fireplace, nursing a glass of scotch. He was an older man, his face weathered by decades of brutality, his knuckles thick with arthritis and old sins. Standing behind him were two heavily armed bodyguards. Alec didn't hesitate. Before the door had even clicked shut, his suppressed Sig Sauer was up. Puffed. Puffed. Two hollow-point rounds found the skulls of the bodyguards before they could even register the intrusion. They dropped heavily to the Persian rug. Vincenzo froze, his scotch spilling over his expensive slacks. He looked up, his eyes widening in a mixture of shock and primal terror as Alec stepped into the firelight. "Cortese," Vincenzo breathed, his voice gravelly. "You're a dead man. You can't just walk in here." "I am here, Vincenzo," Alec said, quietly, keeping the barrel of his weapon aimed directly at the older boss's chest. "And I am not the one who is dead. Pick up your phone. Call Judge Theodore Rossi. Tell him the ex parte order against Clara Hayes is to be rescinded immediately." Vincenzo let out a harsh, barking laugh, though his hands shook. "You think you can force my hand? You're weak, Alec. You let a scrub woman and a brat soften you. That hit in your lobby was just the beginning." Alec's eyes darkened. "You missed. Now you pay the toll." "I didn't miss," Vincenzo sneered, leaning back in his chair, trying to salvage his pride in the face of his executioner. "I didn't even order the hit." Alec's finger tightened fractionally on the trigger. He didn't speak, demanding the truth through his silence. "You think you're so smart, tracking the Kroll data," Vincenzo mocked. "Richard Banning came to me, yes. But he didn't just tell me you threatened him. He came to me terrified because he had been skimming off both of us. He hired those freelance shooters for your lobby, Alec. He wanted to kill you, frame me for the hit, and let our families wipe each other out so he could take over the union laundering contracts free and clear. I only found out after his shooters failed. I used Judge Rossi to take the kid because I knew it would smoke you out of your hole." The twist settled into Alec's mind with icy clarity. Richard Banning, the cowardly, trembling owner of Summit Janitorial Services, was a rat trying to play two apex predators against each other. It made Banning's betrayal of Clara's wages even more deeply sinister. "Thank you for the clarification, Vincenzo," Alec said smoothly. "Wait, we can work together. We can take Banning apart," Vincenzo started, throwing his hands up in surrender. "I will handle Banning," Alec interrupted. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot was a quiet, definitive punctuation mark to the Lucchese reign. Alec immediately walked over to Vincenzo's desk, finding the private secure phone. He bypassed the lock using the biometric thumbprint of the deceased boss. He found the contact for Judge Theodore Rossi and hit dial. "Vincenzo, it's late," the judge's nervous voice echoed over the line. "The police are at Cortese's gate, but his lawyers are filing injunctions." "Judge Rossi," Alec's deep, cold voice interrupted. A sharp intake of breath hissed through the speaker. "Who is this?" "This is Alec Cortese. Vincenzo Lucchese is no longer available. He will never be available again," Alec stated, letting the terrifying implication hang in the air. "I am looking at documents that detail $3 million routed through offshore accounts into your wife's charity foundation. You have exactly 5 minutes to call Captain Arthur Reynolds. You will tell him the testimony regarding Clara Hayes was fabricated, the warrant is invalid, and the case is closed. If those police cruisers are not gone from my gate in 10 minutes, Kroll releases your financials to the FBI, and I send my men to your summer house." I will make the call," the judge stammered, his career and life flashing before his eyes. Alec hung up. He dropped the phone onto Vincenzo's chest, turned, and vanished back into the shadows. Dawn broke over Brooklyn in a wash of pale gold and bruised purple. Clara was pacing the length of the study, her hands wrung white with anxiety. Dominic stood silently by the door, an immovable sentinel. Suddenly, Carmine's radio crackled. "The cruisers are pulling back. I repeat, NYPD and Child Services are withdrawing. The perimeter is clear." Clara stopped, her knees buckling in sheer relief. She clamped a hand over her mouth, tears of absolute exhaustion and gratitude spilling down her cheeks. He had done it. Alec had protected her daughter. 20 minutes later, the heavy front doors of the brownstone opened. Alec walked in. His dark overcoat was stained with something darker than the fabric, his face drawn and pale, a fresh cut bleeding sluggishly above his eyebrow. He looked like a king returning from a brutal, victorious crusade. Clara didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She ran across the foyer and threw herself into his arms. Alec groaned slightly at the impact, wrapping his large, blood-stained hands around her waist, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He breathed in the scent of her, the clean, citrus smell that had haunted his empty penthouse just days ago. "They're gone," Clara sobbed into his chest. "Mia is safe. You did it." "It's over," Alec murmured, his voice rough. "Vincenzo is dead. Judge Rossi buried the files. You and Mia will never be hunted again." He pulled back slightly, looking down into her tear-streaked face. "Carmine intercepted Richard Banning at Teterboro Airport an hour ago, trying to board a private flight to Costa Rica. He will be dealt with. His accounts have been drained and transferred to an irrevocable trust in Mia's name. She will never have to worry about unpaid wages for the rest of her life." Clara stared at him, overwhelmed by the sheer, staggering weight of his power and his devotion. He had burned half the city to the ground to keep her safe. He had taken the darkest parts of his world and used them as a shield for hers. "You're bleeding," she whispered, her fingers gently touching the cut above his eye. "It's a small price," Alec replied, his dark eyes intensely focused on hers. He rested his forehead against hers. "I told you, Clara, I collect my debts, and you owe me nothing. But I want everything." Clara looked at the man who had ordered executions and manipulated judges, the Mafia Boss who terrified the bravest men in New York. But all she saw was the man who had knelt on his pristine rug to offer a 7-year-old girl a handkerchief, the man who had thrown himself over her body in a hail of bullets. She was a working-class mother, and he was the devil of Manhattan, but the intersection of their lives was permanent. "Then take it," Clara whispered fiercely, pulling his lips down to hers. The kiss was a vow, sealing a dark, unbreakable pact between them. She wasn't a prisoner in a gilded cage anymore. She was the queen of the Cortese Empire, and anyone who dared to threaten her or her daughter would have to face the wrath of the devil himself. Upstairs, the soft sound of a door opening broke the heavy silence. Little Mia, wearing her pink pajamas and clutching her stuffed rabbit, wandered out onto the landing. She peered down the grand staircase, rubbing her eyes. She saw her mother wrapped in the arms of the towering, terrifying man from the penthouse. "Mommy?" Mia called out, her high voice echoing in the foyer. "Are the bad men gone?" Alec pulled back from Clara, looking up at the little girl who had marched into his office and changed the trajectory of his entire life. A genuine soft smile broke through the hardened lines of his face. "Yes, Mia," Alec called back up to her, his voice devoid of its usual lethal edge. "The bad men are gone, and they are never coming back. Thank you so much for listening to this intense, dark romance mafia saga. If you were captivated by Clara's resilience, Mia's innocent bravery, and Alec Cortese's ruthless devotion to protecting them at all costs, please hit that like button to let us know. Don't forget to share this video with fellow story lovers who crave high-stakes drama, unexpected plot twists, and a romance that defies the odds. If you want to dive into more gripping, real-life-inspired stories, thrilling criminal underworld narratives, and heartwarming tales of justice and loyalty, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support helps us create more amazing content and bring these thrilling, multi-part stories to life. Drop a comment below and tell us which twist shocked you the most. See you in the next story.